Welcome, everyone. This is our last webinar for the academic year. We're going to wait just a few minutes to let people join who might be coming from another meeting or obligation. So hang tight just for a few minutes. Can't believe it is May 1 already. And it's such a beautiful day outside. It's not reaching 100 just yet. I still see some people coming on board. Welcome, everyone. We're just going to wait just a couple of minutes. Make sure everybody can join us. We'll wait maybe just one more minute. Oops, more people are getting ready, coming in. Let's see, maybe a few more seconds. All right, it's going to get started. So welcome. This is our last webinar for the academic year. Thank you for showing up on this beautiful May 1st Friday afternoon. Today's webinar is going to focus on assessing, documenting, and communicating your organization's research impact. So this will be a little different than last month's Pathways to Impact webinar, where we really looked at assessing your project. This is really looking across the projects and the work of your organization. I'm really excited to hear everything that Jen and Ellison are going to bring to us today. And I will see you at the end of this meeting. Jen, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Michelle. Hi, everybody. As Michelle said, welcome. My name is Jen Fields. I'm the director of the Office of Societal Impact, which is a unit that sits under the Office of Research and Partnerships. We start every one of these webinars just giving you a little introduction to who we are and what we do, in case there are new folks here. So our office is really all about this vision of advancing a university where research and creative inquiry consistently and equitably improve lives in Arizona and beyond by centering communities, strengthening practices for impactful research, and embedding societal impact across the research enterprise. So we know there's lots of different metrics for impact across higher education. They haven't always focused on these societal benefits. And so we really, our agenda is to make sure that we are communicating those as well as the more traditional metrics. Next slide, please. So we are a service unit. We are here to support faculty, staff, students in things like proposal consultations, designing programs that will have impact as part of their sponsored projects. Often that involves helping folks find just the right community partners or other campus partners to do the work to get to that impact. We have experience in evaluation and assessment. We've all served as evaluators on federally funded projects and other projects. And we do professional development like this webinar series and some other things. And so again, we're a service unit. This is all complementary to folks on campus. So we encourage you to reach out to us if you are interested in any of these things, if you're working on a proposal or just a project. Next slide, please. So it's myself. You met Michelle, who's our associate director, and Allison Meadow is not only associate research professor in our office, as you see here, but she is the head of the CLEMAS project and all sorts of other fascinating and very impactful projects. So we're really happy to have Allison here today, and she was really instrumental in developing the work that you're going to see today. Next slide. I always like to start with our land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of Indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the O'odham and the Yaqui. Committed to diversity and inclusion, the university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign Native nations and Indigenous communities through education offerings, partnerships, and community service. Next slide. All right, so today we're going to do some very brief introductions, primarily in the chat. We're going to ask you a little question at the beginning, just to get a little feedback from who's here and how you're already sort of doing some of this work. We're going to talk about why we do this work. Why would we want to assess societal impacts? Why isn't it enough to just stick with those traditional metrics? And then we'll introduce you to some frameworks for doing this work at, as Michelle said, we're talking about at the department or institutional or organizational level. So you have projects that are like comparing apples to oranges. So how do you begin to document and tell a cohesive story about the impact across all of those projects for your unit, for your organization? How you document some of those impacts, and then a toolkit that Allison has really been developing for quite some time now, and we're ready to debut it for you all here today. So we're excited about that. Next slide. Okay, so for the introductions, we would love if y'all would take a moment to think about how you're documenting some of these sort of non-traditional metrics, some of these impacts where there's not an easily, number of publications. And when we're talking about societal impacts, we're talking about those impacts beyond academia. So those traditional metrics aren't what we're looking to capture here. We're looking to capture the ways you are improving the lives of the people of the world or of Arizona or of the University of Arizona, how you're building capacity, how you're having these impacts that are beyond what the academic world measures and cares about. So we would love for you to, in the chat, if you want to introduce yourself, your name, and kind of what unit or organizational level you are representing, and if you're doing any of these things to qualitatively think about, examine, document, or quantitatively some of these impacts that you're having beyond the U of A and beyond the academic world. And I'm not seeing any action in the chat, which might be just be an indicator that this is new to people and this is not easy to do. So we're going to still, please, if you're thinking about it, if you want to put anything in the chat, feel free to, but we'll go ahead and move on. So why would we want to assess these things? If the institution has metrics that it values about academia, why would we do this work? Why do we want to assess these things? There's a few good reasons. So, and thank you, Kristen. Kristen started us off in the chat. I appreciate it. And Caitlin. Okay, so one of the biggest things I think, particularly in this era we're living in right now, is this idea of public trust in science. We see that a lot of our institutions are being dismantled. There are some narratives out there that are eroding trust. It had been on sort of a downward slope. It increased a little as of the last year on this chart. I think that part of that is the dynamic that we're living in. And we like to think about each of us having part of our responsibility is not only to the world of our academic discipline, but to be out there helping to rebuild or build this public trust in science. Next slide, please. And also, there are still funders who want this. I think the National Science Foundation, with its broader impacts review criteria, is the one most of us are familiar that require attention to your impact on society. But lots and lots of other funders are still asking for this. We know that the federal landscape has shifted in the last year and a half, and it continues to shift. But lots of private foundations, in particular, clearly emphasize and require that a project is not just about basic fundamental research, but has a very clear, um, explicit, and direct uh, activities to achieve impact beyond disciplinary impact and academic impact. Next slide, please. And then, of course, we're a land grant institution, and our land grant mission tells us that we exist to serve the people of Arizona, to conduct research and teaching and teaching and learning and service activities that benefit the people of Arizona, um, driving social, cultural, and economic impact within the state, linking our research at the University of Arizona to the critical sectors of the state, what's important to the state's economy, and its key indicators, things like health outcomes, educational attainment, quality of life, that is embedded and inherent in our land grant mission. Next slide, please. And just to expand on this a little further, the Association of Public Land Grant Universities, APLU, has done extensive work looking at this and how universities do better in this space. They have adopted the term public impact research to demonstrate the way that university research benefits and reaches the public. They advocate for conducting more public impact research and doing it with purpose, as I was saying, being intentional about it and having institutional frameworks and approaches that support that work, to engage stakeholders broadly. And we were seeing a lot of funding solicitations really embrace this aspect of it and requiring sort of an industry partner, a community partner, researchers from the social sciences, as well as the physical and natural sciences and engineers. Again, that has shifted a little, but the momentum, I don't think, has shifted. Universities understand that doing this type of work with broad representation of stakeholders is how we solve grand challenges. It's how we do research that gets to solving the problems that we're working on. And doing a better job communicating about that research. We commissioned a report with some of our university community partners, many of whom have been partnered with lots of U of A programs for many, many years. And they talked a lot about the lack of quality communication in all frames, not just as you're working on a project together and being equal partners, but keeping updated and in touch after the project, sharing reports, sharing evaluation reports, sharing media, all that sort of stuff. So communicating better, and building the infrastructure and structures on campus and policies to encourage this work. How do we embed this work in things like promotion and tenure policies and rewards and recognition to really increase this work? And I think that is my last slide for now, and I'll pass it to you, Allison.
Great, thanks, Jen. So it's one thing to just say, go have impact. Go fix everything in the world. Go and then show us how you did it. And that's a lot easier said than done. And it is really important that that we be intentional about how we both plan for the kinds of impacts that we want to have, so that we're doing this so ethically and effectively, and that we really are able to demonstrate very clearly, and then we can back it up with good evidence that we did have the kind of impact that we want. That sort of speaks to that, the public trust in science, that we're not just claiming, yeah, we did this. No, we really want to show, yeah, we really did, and we can show how we had these kinds of impacts. And as Jen said, we have these long-standing metrics and measures for how we demonstrate our academic impact that we all know. We know how many publications and what our H index is and our citations and how many grants and stuff. And this is a new concept and a new set of ideas for many in the academic space. But the good news is we actually don't have to start from ground zero. There are some really nice existing frameworks to help us explore societal impacts out there. And what we can do is we don't have to adopt them wholesale. We get to tailor them. We get to mold them to fit our purposes, the kinds of projects that we do in the context in which we do our work here at Arizona. And that's what we have been working on, and OSI and ORP is really thinking about what's out there and what would work well here. And so that's the sort of the rest of this, is to present some tools and some resources that we've started to curate and put together to just share with you to get you started on this journey. And nothing is locked in. These are not cookie cutter approaches. These are ideas and resources and guidance that you can use to start to think about how you want to talk about, plan for, and demonstrate the kind of impact that you have in the work that you are doing. So we're going to walk through really briefly some of those existing frameworks just to kind of, get our footing, like our friend climbing the scaffolding here. The National Science Foundation Broader Impacts criterion are probably like the best known in the US context. If you have ever applied for NSF funding, you know that you need to make a case for how your project or program is going to have impacts beyond your specific research. You have to have these broader impacts. The broader impacts space has undergone some changes in the last year or so, but the core is still there. They're asking you, the agency is asking you to explain how your research project is going to have an impact in one of these 6 categories that goes beyond just, I have done my research. So you're going to be expected to talk about how your project and how you're incorporating activities or other things that is having an impact in the realm of public engagement. So you are increasing public scientific literacy and public engagement with STEM. Or maybe your project has to do with national security and you want to explain how the research that you're doing, maybe you are working with folks in the national security space and you're advancing some of their interests and working with them collaboratively to do that. And that's going to be part of your proposal. And so the NSF broader impacts really, really well known. But they're not the only ones that are out there. And so we want to make sure that folks are aware there's other ways and there's other language that we can use and to make it even easier sometimes, because not everybody fits the NSF definitions. Not everybody's work. I go, oh, that's not quite what I talk. That doesn't really resonate with my work. So some of the other ways we can look to our colleagues, particularly in the United Kingdom and in Europe. They've been working on these kinds of frameworks for a number of years. For example, this comes from the United Kingdom, the UK system, in which it's called the Research Excellence Framework. Now their funding system is very different from ours, but they have a system in which all research units in their academic institutions are evaluated on the basis of 3 criteria every about 7 or 8 years. They have to show the quality of their outputs, and that's sort of what we're used to, right? Our publications, our citations, etc. And the environment that supports their research. And 25% of the way that they are evaluated for success at the academic unit, sort of analogous to our department level, is on the basis of impact beyond academia. They have a system where they use narrative case studies. They have to submit a set of narrative case studies. These are the categories of societal impact that folks can talk about in the research excellence framework. And this might fit your research a little bit better. Like if you're coming at it the arts and humanities, you might be able to say, I've had a lot of cultural impact. Maybe you feel like your research is having direct environmental impact. You have an opportunity to talk about that. Health impacts, legal impacts, technological impacts. So they've got just a little bit of a broader frame of reference here. And these are a really nice way to start to think about the different ways that our research can get used in the world. Really nice little image of how we can think about this. Very similar categories. This comes out of University College Dublin. Very similar categories as we just saw with the Research Excellence Framework, but I always have liked the way that they've put this together we've got our academic impact, super important. We're sort of anchored there, but we can kind of see how the rest of the societal and economic impact categories are arrayed around that. And I just have always thought that that's a really nice little tool for how we think about the broad range of ways that our research can have impact in the world. Another really interesting and exciting way to just that frames academic research comes from the Netherlands and their strategy evaluation protocol. And they really, again, talk about their evaluating research units on the basis of economic, social, cultural, education, or any other terms that may be relevant. And they very explicitly acknowledge societal impact may often take longer to become apparent, which is a theme we're going to pick up on here in a few minutes. But just, again, most of this is just to say, we have lots of resources and ideas that we can draw on when we start to wade into these areas. We do not feel like we're out there in the wilderness trying to figure this out on our own. Our colleagues around the world have done a lot of work in this area. Some of our colleagues right here in the US have done a lot of cool work in this area too. The University of Minnesota has decided to align all of their research with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And so when you're doing reporting within their system, they ask research units and researchers to talk about how research is contributing to one of the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's just another way to think about how our research is having impact in the world. Okay, so let's get down to a little bit of brass tacks here and think about how do we go about showing that our research has had this impact? How are we documenting these impacts? And this is how, again, this is sort of the process that if you wanted to work with our office and we were putting together some plans for you, an evaluation plan or helping you craft some materials for proposal, these are kind of the steps that we would walk you through. We would start with, okay, what are the societal goals of the work that you're doing? And we kind of think about them in a few different ways. Sometimes, like University of Minnesota, we've got these big global scale goals. Maybe it makes sense to align your research to really big global goals like the UN Sustainable Development Goals, because that really speaks to the kind of work that you're doing. Big goals. We want to align our research with something bigger than just our individual research questions, something that is moving us towards a big impact in the world. We don't have to solve and fix everything, but we want to be able to say, hey, my research is going to contribute to this. I want to push the needle a little bit towards this. And we can do global goals. We could do regional goals. Sometimes that's the most appropriate. And we're going to dig into this in a little bit. But so here in Southern Arizona, we have something called the Prosperity Initiative that really aligns with what our region needs in terms of ways that our region wants to move forward with some social goals. And you could say, oh, my research really nicely informs some of these social goals for our region that I know are really, really important. And so I'd like to talk about contributing to those. Sometimes if you're working in an even smaller scale, maybe a community based, maybe you are in a direct partnership with the community and they have very specific goals, you can define your societal goals based on your individual community partners and saying, oh, this is something that my partners is really important to them, whether that's something at a neighborhood scale or a little bit larger. But think about that a particular group might have have specific goals that we can work towards. So that's kind of step one. So we're going to kind of follow a little bit of a thread using, as an example, sustainable development goals. The other example is the UA Grand Challenges is another example of big goals that we can be working towards. And Jen is going to kind of walk us through a little bit of this.
Yeah, so because we sit under ORP, ORP as the research arm of the university, if you look on their website, you'll see that they are starting to sort of identify these grand challenge research priorities. So a lot of people have said, well, what about U of A has expertise in this, and I don't see it on this list. That's not necessarily the point of these goals. These are grand challenge research priorities. So these are areas where ORP thinks the funding is moving, that sort of on a national scale, these have importance. And so they are sort of identifying these as those national grand challenges that we want to increase our capacity around, increase funding for research around, hope to be, like all universities, renowned, globally recognized for our expertise. Some of these, obviously, we already have huge strengths in. But this is a way really more for ORP to sort of say, hey, this is where the world and the money is right now. How can U of A start to align to those goals, right? It does not mean that everyone at the U of A has to fit into these research goals. And you'll see the human experience is one that doesn't show up on the website. I've seen it in a couple town halls of Tomas. I think it was meant to certainly give a nod, like Allison said, to the folks who don't see themselves in some of those NSF broader impacts or some of these technical areas. But the last two bullets, if you'll see on the next slide. So ORP has tried to put a little more detail of what their goals are in these larger areas where they think U of A might contribute. And of course, they have tried to connect those to Arizona. So you look at military readiness. A lot of people might say, oh, I didn't know that was a U of A research strength, or like, that's not what I think of U of A necessarily as, but we know we have Davis-Monthan here. We know we have Raytheon here. We know there is capacity in our aeronautical engineering. Those in that department do a lot of work in this space. We are huge in space sciences. A lot of the talk about space sciences right now is, and again, this is nationally, this is where the current administration is. How do we turn some of that space work into inward facing national security type stuff? But you'll see others, they're not as far along on. They're having a planning session about the environmental systems, arid land, and agriculture and water, which is a way of not saying climate change in this space we live in some ways, but really building on U of A strengths in these areas. And the human experience is not defined by ORP. So again, these are goals some people might work towards, aligning their impacts towards if it's meaningful to them, but it's just another example of a set of goals that works for some people, doesn't work for everyone. So you find what's most meaningful to you. Next slide. And I think, and this is just a little bit more information about one of the regional goals that Allison mentioned in her initial slide. It's this is really a lovely Pima County Prosperative Initiative is embedded in that regional goal. And there are certainly folks on campus who are working very closely. Brian Mayer in SBS has had what he calls the Tucson Poverty Project for a long time. Like, we consulted with him on a NSF grant. I'm not kidding. I want to say in like 2015 to kind of kick off some of this work. But he actually contributed with all the other community stakeholders to defining the goals for this regional effort, his research contributes data towards these goals. So it's a very nice example where we not only have a very clearly defined regional set of goals, but we can identify a U of A faculty who have been doing work that has created societal impact that we can now look at for more than a decade. And I think, Allison, you're taking it after this.
So that's step one, right? Align your research with something bigger than your research. I want this research to contribute to something, to a societal goal of some kind. And as Jen said, there's a number to pick from. But you want to be moving towards something. And we think of it as contributing towards, not solving world hunger. Nobody expects one project to solve that, but making a contribution, adding to crucial information for Pima County's prosperity initiative. Those kinds of things. That's what we're moving towards. Got to have that societal goal. But it's not enough to just say, yeah, my research aligns with this, therefore I'm having an impact. We want to dig a little bit deeper, and this is where, we're all researchers, right? We want evidence. And so we want to dig into how we're having that impact and really be able to show that. And so this is another set of another framework that we use to help folks tease out that how. We call them the impact descriptors. And these are some tools that describe how research can be used in a variety of different ways in the world. So the first one is conceptual use of research. So we might see that research has contributed to changes in people's knowledge or awareness about an issue. And this is very often that very foundational piece, right? Like, you really kind of have to have knowledge and awareness before anything else changes. So it's very often the most common, the most important, and sometimes the most overlooked way of starting to have a contribution and making change in the world. Other ways of contributing to those big goals: capacity building. Your research is contributing or enhancing to skills, expertise, or the resources of an organization or the group of people that you might be working with. So, if you are making sure that, for example, Pima County has really critical data that they need and continuing access to that critical data, that could be a really nice example of that capacity building aspect. Or maybe you have done some very specific skills building with the group of people that you're working with. That's another really critical use of, example of capacity building. Connectivity. This is a really common one that gets overlooked a lot, but research contributing to new or strengthened relationships, partnerships, or networks that endure after a project ends. We think of this as a measure of trust. And one of the things that we know is nobody wants to use research that they don't trust or that comes from people that they don't trust. So if we start to see partnerships, relationships, and networks build up over the course of a relationship and build up over the course of a project and persist even after that project has ended, we know that we have some trust built up, and we know that that's a really good indicator that any of the research or other things that have gone on in that project are more likely to get used. And so many times we have people say, oh, I didn't know, like the fact that I stayed in contact and and stayed friends with somebody that I started on a project with 5, 6, 7 years ago. Wait, that's like a legitimate impact of my work. It really is. It's super important, and we don't talk about it enough. And so this kind of framework gives us the language and the opportunity to talk about how important that is. Then we get into the more tangible stuff, measurable things. Instrumental impacts are when research has contributed to changes in plans, practices, and policies. We might see this when your research gets cited in a policy document, it gets referred to in a county plan or a city plan, or you just, you hear from your partners that you've been working with that, oh, you know what, because of the work that we did together, we actually changed something about how we work in our organization. And so that's that instrumental change. Now, those longer term impacts, social or environmental impacts, are generally the outcome of all of these other four mixing and mingling together. And then we get tangible changes in a social or environmental system that happen because of some of those attitude, behavior, understanding, policy changes, and then something changes kind of in the real world. And we also want to have ways to document that. Those sometimes take longer, as our friends in the Netherlands pointed out. So these first four, conceptual, capacity building, connectivity, and instrumental, are ways that we can start to document impacts. I call them breadcrumbs. They're the little breadcrumbs that can help us know whether we're on the right pathway to those bigger term impacts in the long term. Because we're much more likely to see those first four in the time scale of a project, 2 to 3 years, maybe 5 years if we're lucky. Social and environmental impacts might take a little longer to emerge and to be generated. So we want to keep track of those first four so that we know what we're looking for in the long term. Okay, so now we're going to put things together. So we start with, okay, I said we're going to kind of dive into like, we're going to use those sustainable development goals just to walk through an example here. So we could show the impact of an organization by saying, okay, we looked across, in this case, this is just a little example of 12 different projects within one unit. And we took a look at which sustainable development goals those projects were contributing to. This is just a count, right? Okay, yeah, we see, yep, lots of people said that their research was aligning with those sustainable development goals. And that tells us something, right? Like this tells us, yes, people's research was aligning and they feel like they're contributing to these big goals. Again, we don't really have like that neediness of how and in what ways, but it's a good start. So that's step one. So then we said same 12 projects. Okay, let's start to like look at some of the evidence, like tell us what kinds of changes were you seeing? What do you have evidence for? What can you tell us about how your project really moved that needle? And so we saw really nice examples. Oh my gosh, okay, 10 of the 12 projects really did have like those changes in plans, practices, and policies that they could show us evidence of. That good. We would hope to see, most of the, if not all of the projects having that increased awareness and understanding and the conceptual impacts. Not at all surprising that we just saw a few projects with those longer term social or ecological impacts. Again, those are longer term. We were looking at a tight time frame. So not at all surprising. This is where we want to narrate this and understand. It's not that they didn't have those impacts, it's that we haven't been able to detect them yet because of the time frame that we were doing this work. But now we get to see, okay, how are projects making change? And then we put it all together. And put our sustainable development goals along the top of this chart and put our impact descriptors along the side and said, let's line them up to see which projects how are each project really kind of moving the needle in each one of these development goal categories. So that gave us a little bit more of a rich understanding of what was going on in this particular unit. And so you can start to see, some patterns, like, for example, where there's real strength in this particular organization. SDG 13 is climate action. There lots was going on in there. Lots of action in SDG 11, which is sustainable cities. So two obvious strengths of this organization, and they really pop out here. And we see a lot of different impacts happening, different kinds of impacts happening in those categories. And we see that there's really some work going on. we see some blanks in some of these, and we go, oh, well, are those categories that we maybe, is this something that we should expect to be blank because that's not a goal of this organization? Or are they like, oh shoot, maybe we meant to be working in that, and maybe we need to actually pivot and spend a little bit more time and energy in those areas. So it gives a kind of a few different ways to assess what's going on in your organization. You get to see across the board where you really moving forward, and you get to see like where are you really having a lot of strength in those descriptor categories. Where have you got some real strength in terms of, we can see lots of capacity building, connectivity very strong, and you can just you just start to see those patterns when you put those two things together. Like I said earlier, we got to have evidence. We're researchers, and we should be collecting evidence, and we should be making evidence-informed decisions. So, but in this space, there's a range of ways to collect evidence of impact. So we want to have the evidence that identifies the consequences of our action. We did this in this project, and have we achieved our goals? Are we having the kind of impact we want? So going back here, like, if we said we expected to have, to really influence policy in the space of climate action, number 13, I go, yeah, if we've got evidence that we're influencing, of policy changes that we can point to, I'd say having 6 out of 12 projects really pushing the needle there, and we've got enough evidence to back that up. That's good evidence informed. Yeah, that's good. That backs that up. On the flip side, if we said, oh, we had this expectation for our organization, and we look across here, we go, oh, we didn't meet that. We maybe need to invest a little bit more in that area of our work. So evidence should be demonstrable. It is not enough to just say, yeah, you did that. We should all know that. This is our profession. But it's funny how often sometimes we get a little bit like, it feels nerve-wracking to say we're going to assess our own work. And I think all of us on this call who have worked in an evaluation space understand that nobody's here to judge and grade. We're here when we work as evaluators, we are literally here to make your work even better. And so this is a learning space when we do research evaluation. And so evidence needs to be demonstrable. We need to hold ourselves to that standard, but this isn't critique and grading. This is, hey, let's make sure that we see what's going on here. The nice thing is evidence does not always need to be formally collected. Some grants do require formal external evaluation. If that is the case, call us. If that's not the case, I'm going to show you in just a minute a few tips for how you might be able to collect evidence on your own. You do not need to demonstrate that you completely solved the problem. Nobody expects your project to have solved world hunger if you said that you were wanting to work towards that SDG. You do need to show that you have contributed toward finding a solution or helped make change aligned with that Sustainable Development Goal, or one of those goals in the Pima Prosperity Initiative, or one of the UA Grand Challenges. My project, I can show you that we pushed the needle, that we were aligned with that, and we made some changes in that area. So some examples of evidence of impact, and this ranges from the quite informal, but it needs to be standardized, it needs to be consistent, to very, very formal. So in the conceptual use category, right, that awareness and understanding, you could just be hearing feedback from the people that you're working with. If you've got community partners and they're like, every time you meet, or they're calling you or emailing you and saying, boy, I really enjoyed that meeting, or I have really learned a lot, and here's some examples, or they're asking you like increasingly really like deep questions and thoughtful questions, keep those notes, keep those emails. Those are lovely examples of how your partners are learning and engaging with the materials that you are sharing. You can do much more formal things like pre and post surveys that are tracking understanding, if that aligns with the kind of research that you're doing. You might see that your partners are communicating your research to someone else. We've seen really nice examples where you've done a research project with a community partner, and then maybe they borrow your slides, maybe they develop their own, and they share that information with another group of people. What a lovely way to know that they have learned and understand the material and are comfortable sharing it with others. You might see your work show up in the media. Great way to know that it's making it out there in the world. In that capacity building, you might see very specific skills being built, new funding or resources. Maybe your partners have used some of the research to get new funding as part of, they've used it in a funding proposal. That's a great way to document resource building. That connectivity piece, that relationship building. Our partners calling you over time, even after a project has ended? Are they inviting you to things? Maybe they want to keep hearing from you. They like you. They're showing up repeatedly to your events. And they're willing to work on a new project with you. And that network is growing over time. Some really nice tools exist if you want to work on those instrumental impacts and look at those. One can just be like, hey, we worked on this project together, and then my partners told me that they cited this research, or they referenced this research when they wrote up some guidance documents for their organization or a piece of policy. There's also some much more formal ways to search your policy impact using some bibliometric information. Overton database or SAGE policy profiles. You guys can Google those. And then if you want to get into that long-term monitoring of social and environmental impact, this is where I definitely suggest getting an external evaluator involved, because it is a little bit more robust and it's a more of a long-term undertaking. But surveying or monitoring that conditions are changing over time. Maybe a new system or structure was built that addresses that issue that you were looking at. So thinking about those longer-term issues. Okay, so to help with all of this, because you can't, this is not something that you should feel like you have to just sit down and make up on your own. Jen mentioned at the beginning, we just put together an online set of resources that we call the Toolkit for Research Impact. This is in no way meant to take the real in-person connections that our office wants to have with you out of the picture. But it is a nice way to give you a chance to do a bit of a self-guided tour through some of these resources, if you just feel like you need to sit down and familiarize yourself, or you want to kind of dig into it on your own. So we built the Toolkit for Research Impact. The link is there, and I think Emily was going to put the link in the chat for you as well. Maybe she already did that. I can't keep track of the chat while I'm sharing my slides. The toolkit has a lot of resources that we hope will be helpful for you. Thinking about your pathways to impact, how to write those purpose statements, like how do I make sure that my organization can articulate our big societal goals? How am I thinking about writing engagement plans to make sure that my research is getting out into the world? Lots of tools and ideas for documenting and assessing impact that we just talked about, and some guidance both for organizational leaders and for individuals about societal impact and academic careers. Jen mentioned some of that, like this stuff can be hard if if it doesn't align with promotion and tenure or other academic reward structures. So we have some resources that can be helpful for folks there. And I'm just going to take you through just a few screenshots. I didn't want to get super fancy and try to walk through it all live, but hopefully you can get in there and just play around a little bit. So we have 3 sets of resources. If you're an individual researcher, or you're developing your own research proposal, that's the pathway number 1. You can click on the resources for researchers, and that'll take you kind of step by step through thinking about societal goals, developing those engagement plans, thinking about how you're going to document your impacts, evaluation, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to take you through a couple of the resources that we have for organization and institutional leaders, because that's what we were talking about today. Our third pathway, resources for broader and societal impact professionals, still under development. Bear with us, but I will put out a call that if that is you, if you are a broader and societal impact professional and there is something that you would like answered in this kind of resource, give us a call, shoot us an email, because there's still time for us to adjust the materials that can be in there. Okay, we're going to follow this third pathway really briefly. So when you click on that pathway for organizational and institutional leaders, we've got a little timeline, and you just work through this tool. We go right from an introduction and we walk stepwise through the process of thinking about how you would do an impact assessment for your department or an organization, or maybe even for a whole institution, if that's the scale that you're working at. The first step after the little introduction is you're going to define your organization's societal goals. So each section of the toolkit has some background information, lots of links and other resources if you want to explore some of these issues in greater detail. And then as you scroll down, there's always a set of, or on most of these, the steps along the way, there's a set of guiding questions and a text box that you can put your thoughts in. It's really meant to be your thoughts, a place for you to draft, a place for you to just, get your ideas down on the page, respond to the question, and what, wherever you are kind of in this journey at the time. If you, on the very first page of the toolkit, when you first kind of pick your pathway, there's a place for you to put your email address in there. If you do that, you're able to save your responses. You can save drafts, and you'll get an email that allows you to go back to where you picked up, where you left off, and you can go back and pick up. And or you can go all the way to the end, and you can click submit. And at the end, then you'll get an email that has all of your responses to all of the questions that you completed. And you can just keep that for your records. So if you start this process because you're like, oh man, I've got to do this big institutional assessment, or I've got a really big proposal that I've got to do, I want to just get my ideas down. There's this opportunity. I can just brainstorm, and I can just just jot my ideas through, using these guiding questions in a structured way. And then you're going to get this email with all of your questions. And then you can save that. And when you sit down to write your proposal, or you sit down to sort of launch your institution assessment, you've got your ideas cataloged there for you. We've got how you might go through some guiding questions to think about what your organization's goals might be. Another section is a little bit of what we just talked about today. How would you assess kind of the cumulative impact? So you're an organization leader or a department leader, and you've got 20 different ongoing research projects, or 25 on whatever it is, lots of different activities. And we've got some guiding questions and some tools to just help you think through, like, okay, here's how I'm going to organize that information. Here's how I'm going to think through step by step how many of these are contributing to our goals, where we've been really strong, where we might want to put a little bit more emphasis in the future. We've got some thoughts, ideas for communicating impact. Just thoughts. This one, similar to the little bar chart I showed you before, a little way to say, oh, here's how we're like across the board, all the sustainable development goals that we're contributing to, and the size of the bubble indicates, how many projects or how big our contribution is. I mentioned policy impact. This is a little screenshot of SAGE policy profile. You can figure out how many policy documents your research is contributing to. It's a nice way to demonstrate that impact. Narrative case studies, do not ignore narrative case studies. Impact is contextual. Sometimes the very best way to explain the depth of impact that you've had is to explain the context in which that impact has happened, and it gives you an opportunity to really explain why it was so important for the people that you were working with or the area that you were working in. There's ways to structure narrative case studies that do not get all wild and woolly, that follow a nice format. We have those resources on there so that you can kind of follow a bullet point list. So it stays pretty tight and you answer key questions, but it does give you an opportunity to provide a little more background information and context for why it was so important to do this kind of research. And like I said, when you get to the very end of the path, you get a chance you can preview all of your questions. If you don't like one of your answers, you just use the back arrow, you go back, you fix it up, you come back, and when you are happy with your answers, you press submit and you get that email that prints out all of your questions, and you can just save that for your records. You can grab that QR code. You can click on Emily's link. This is new. We just put this out live. We welcome feedback. We welcome ideas. Yeah, consider it sort of in beta testing. And so if you're playing around with it and you come across something that doesn't make sense or is still a little bit clunky, we would like to hear that. Please be kind, but we would like to hear about something that isn't working quite right, because we want a chance to make sure that it is. Give us a chance to fix it. So yeah, please highlight something if you're coming across something, or reach out if something isn't clear. Michelle.
Hey, thanks so much, Allison and Jen, just for all of the hard work and thoughtfulness that you put into these assessment tools, and for sharing it out today. Before we get into our Q&A time, I just wanted to mention that even though it's the end of the academic year, it's coming to a close, we are still here for you. We are an a service unit, and we're here to support you through any of the stages as you work through to assess your organization's impact. We're happy to help you with planning meetings. We're happy to join a meeting. Sometimes it's good to have a meeting facilitator just so that everyone can participate. We're here to support you however that you need. So please feel free to reach out to us. And finally, I wanted to mention that we'll be sending out our annual survey that asks about the usefulness and the value of our Pathways to Impact series. We hope that you would take just a few minutes to fill that out. We'll also be asking about your ideas for future webinars or information that you're interested in. So that will be coming out in probably another week. Okay, so on to questions. You can either unmute or you can put your questions in the chat, however you like to do it. And we're here for another half an hour, up to a half an hour. If you have a lot of questions, we are here.
Or if you need time to mull things over, which is sometimes the case, you can reach out later. That's okay too.
Absolutely.
I have one quick question. I'm curious whether you've had any good strategies over. Can you hear me okay?
You're cutting in and out a little bit.
Oh, is it any better now?
Yep.
Okay. I'm wondering if you have any strategies for using Overton or Sage policy profiles with the researchers that you're working with. Just my sense from Sage policy profiles is that they all have to sign up for an account. Um, and so yeah, I'm just kind of curious about how you've used those specific tools to track.
Yeah, I've used them in a couple of different ways. I have done little mini summaries. So Overton, if for anybody who's not familiar, Overton is it's a terrific tool. It's a database that links academic publications to policy documents from all over the world. The catch is that it is a subscription database. Ah, when I've had access to Overton, I have done little mini profiles sort of research organizations. So we'll take like all of the publications from a research group between, in a 5-year, 10-year time frame, whatever that is. You can search on, you can use DOIs to search in Overton. And so, you collect all of those, you put them into the Overton search engine, and it spits out a report. I caution, it does take some data cleaning. But then you can get a really nice little profile of here are the agencies or organizations that most frequently use this research group's research, the countries they're in, the kind of document that is this produced by a government agency? Is this produced by a think tank? So you can do a really nice little summary of this is who is using our work most frequently outside of academia, and which is really nice. And you can pair that sometimes really nicely with who's using the work within academia too. You can do kind of a standard like citation analysis, and that's a nice way to balance that too. Sage policy profiles is good for individual people because it's linked to you personally. But well, Kristen, I'm going to betray our friendship here. I happen to know, if you're putting together, for example, a promotion packet, if you create your own Sage policy profile, that is a really lovely way to say, in addition to, in your write-up, here's my H index, here's, my publications, etc. In addition to this measure of academic impact, my research has been cited X number of times by this kind of organization, etc. And you can, you're able to provide a link to your Sage policy profile page so that anybody reviewing your packet can click on that and they get a nice little summary of the work that you're doing. And again, I think it's a lovely way to balance. I'm great in academia, and I'm also having this real world impact, and I have these tools that I can show that. I'm going to pivot really quickly because Megan had a great question about what happens to data entered into the toolkit. And Megan, I meant to say this in the presentation. And we have a little statement about this on the front page of the toolkit where we ask you to, if you want to put your email in. While yes, it sort of does live in our server because we want to be able to, if you ever lost your answers, we do have a mechanism where we could resend them to you, but they're not shared publicly and nobody in our office is looking at them. The only reason that we would ever go to look at the results would be if you emailed and said, oh my gosh, I lost the email where you sent me like my answers. Can you resend it? That is the only circumstance in which anybody would go into that, and then we would find, you would set, you would give us your email address, and then we would go in and say, oh, there's yours. Here's the little thing, resend it, and that is the only reason. We do not. It is yours. It is nothing that any of us are looking at. So thank you for reminding, and I'm sorry, I totally forgot to say that in the main presentation, but super important. It's your information.